The silver chains cut into my wrists like ice and fire at once. I didn't fight them. I could have. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to shift, to claw through the iron door of the holding cell, to run until the pine forest swallowed me whole and no one could reach me again. But I didn't move. I sat on the cold stone floor of the packed dungeon, wrists bound, knees drawn to my chest, and I listened to the footsteps descending the staircase, heavy, deliberate, furious. I knew those footsteps better than I knew my own heartbeat. Alpha Caden Voss. The door swung open so hard it cracked against the stone wall, and he filled the frame like a storm had taken the shape of a man, 6 feet for of barely contained rage. Dark hair damp from the rain outside, eyes, those terrible, beautiful eyes, blazing gold. The color they turned when the wolf inside him was close to the surface. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, quietly, so quietly it was worse than shouting, he said, "Tell me it isn't true, Lena." I said nothing. His jaw tightened. "Tell me you didn't meet with Harlan Voss. Tell me you didn't hand him information about our pack's borders. Tell me my own mate didn't sell us out to my brother." I looked at the floor. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before he crossed the room, crouched in front of me, and grabbed my chin with one hand, not cruelly, but desperately, tilting my face up to his. "Say something." I looked into his gold eyes, and I thought about the small boy sleeping in a safe house 40 miles north of here with 2 trusted warriors standing guard over him. I thought about the note Harlan had slipped under my door 6 nights ago, "Give me what I want, or the child pays the price." I thought about Caden's son, 4 years old, his mother dead 2 years, his father's heir and the most vulnerable person in this entire pack. And I said nothing. Because if I told Caden the truth, Harlan would know within the hour. He had a spy somewhere in this pack. I didn't know who, and until I did, the only way to keep Eli safe was to let everyone, including Caden, believe the lie. Caden released my chin. He stood. He turned his back to me, and his voice, when it came, was broken in a way I had never heard from him before. 23 months, you've been my mate for 23 months. He walked out and locked the door behind him, and I sat in the dark and told myself it was worth it. It had to be worth it. Act 1, before the fall 8 days earlier. The world had been uncomplicated. I was the pack healer, not the most glamorous title in the Ironwood pack hierarchy, but mine. I'd earned it over 6 years of apprenticeship under Elder Mara, studying herb lore and wound closing and the particular chemistry of werewolf biology that made our healing needs different from humans. We were faster to mend, yes, but the infections that did take hold in us were savage, and silver wounds didn't close the way regular cuts did. And the psychological trauma of forced shifts left marks that no amount of physical recovery could touch. I understood my pack. I understood their bodies and their pain. What I hadn't expected, when I took the position at 22, was to understand their alpha. Caden Voss had taken over the pack 3 years before I became healer, after his father's death. He was 30 then, already carrying the particular gravity that came with leading a pack of 200 wolves through a tense territorial period. His brother Harlan, older by 2 years, passed over for alpha status because their father had recognized something cold and opportunistic in him, had left the pack in fury and built his own fractured coalition 50 miles east. The Greystone Pack. Small, volatile, ambitious. The 2 brothers had been in a cold war ever since. I had treated Caden twice in my first year, once for a silver-tipped arrow wound from a border skirmish. Once for exhaustion so complete his body had simply shut down during a pack meeting and refused to restart without 3 days of sleep and forced broth. Both times he'd been a difficult patient. Impatient, unused to being still, uncomfortable with vulnerability. Both times I'd told him, with considerable bluntness, that his body wasn't optional and he needed to stop treating it like an inconvenience. He'd looked at me with those gold eyes and said, "No one talks to me like that, someone should," I'd said, drink the broth. He'd drunk the broth. Somewhere in the second year, he'd started finding reasons to pass the healing wing on his evening rounds. Then reasons to stop. Then reasons to stay. His son Eli had a small obsession with the dried herb bundles I kept hanging from the rafters, and Caden would bring him by to smell the lavender and the sage and the pine resin. And the boy would fall asleep in my armchair while his father and I talked about nothing important. Pet gossip, whether old stories, until the nothing important became the thing we both looked forward to most. The mate bond had announced itself on a Tuesday in October, sudden and unmistakable, like a key turning in a lock that had always been there. Neither of us had been prepared for it. Caden, I think, had believed he wouldn't have a second mate after Ellie's mother passed. Anya had been his chosen mate, not a true bond. And her death had left him with a grief that had calcified around him like armor. The bond between us cracked that armor in ways that clearly terrified him, me. I had simply never expected an alpha, but the bond was the bond, and slowly, over the months that followed, we had built something real inside it, something that felt, by the 8th day before my rest, like the most solid thing in my life. Act 2, the note had arrived on a Wednesday evening, slipped under the door of the healing wing, while I was in the back storage room cataloging supplies. A single folded piece of paper. No envelope. No signature. I know where the boy sleeps. I know which window doesn't latch. Bring me the patrol rotation for the eastern border, all 3 shifts, the full 30-day cycle, and he stays safe. You have 6 days. Tell anyone and I'll know within the hour. I have ears inside your walls. I read it 4 times. Then I sat down on the floor of the storage room and pressed my hands flat against the cold stone and breathed. Eli 4 years old. Dark hair like his father, his mother's green eyes. Currently obsessed with beetles and deeply convinced that I kept magic rocks in my medicine cabinet. Which I did not. They were calcified mineral deposits used in poultice, but I had stopped correcting him because his delight was too good to ruin. Eli who had no mother. Eli who had never done anything to anyone. My first instinct was to go directly to Caden. My second instinct, arriving half a second later, was the paralyzing recognition that I couldn't. Whoever Harlan's spy inside the pack was, and it had to be Harlan, only Harlan had both the motive and the viciousness. They would report back the moment I told anyone. And Harlan would move on Eli before Caden could get protection in place. Ellie's current security was standard, 2 warriors per shift, rotating schedule, the boys' room on the 2nd floor of the Alpha house. Good security. Not proof against an inside threat that knew the rotations before they were run. I needed to move Eli first, quietly, without explaining why. I needed Harlan to think I was complying. And then I needed to find the spy. 6 days. Act 3, the operation day 1, I went to Caden and told him I was worried about Eli. He's been sleeping poorly, I said, which was true. I'd noticed it at my last check-in. I'd like to take him to stay with Mara for a few days. The elder house is quieter, and I want to monitor him more closely. Caden had frowned. Should I be concerned? Not yet. It may just be growing pains. His shift instincts will start activating around this age. I just want him somewhere I can watch him overnight without disrupting your schedule. He'd studied me. Even then, with no reason to suspect anything. He had that quality, the alpha's instinct, that sensed something in the air without being able to name it. All right, he said finally. Keep me updated. Day 2, I moved Eli to Mara's house, and then, without telling Mara why, I asked her to send him onto the safe house with 2 of her personal warriors, Dessa and Rorik, wolves I had known for years and whose loyalty I would stake my life on. I told her I had reason to believe there was a threat and that she needed to say nothing to anyone, including the alpha. Mara had looked at me for a long moment with her crow-dark eyes, You know what you're doing, child. No, I said honestly, but I know what I'm not doing. Which is leaving that boy where someone can reach him. She had sent him. Days 3 and 4, I watched. The spy had to be someone with access to the Alpha's house and the patrol schedules. That narrowed it to perhaps 30 wolves. I couldn't confront anyone directly. Any accusation would filter back. Instead, I fed 3 different versions of a small, invented detail to 3 different people and waited to see which version reached me back through gossip channels. On day 4, I had my answer. Tomas Reed, Junior Patrol Coordinator, 26 years old, had been with the pack his whole life, had a gambling debt with an outside creditor that I had stumbled across 6 months ago and flagged in my own mental records as a potential vulnerability and then, like a fool, had forgotten to mention to anyone. Harlan had gotten to him through the debt. It was almost elegant, in a horrible way. Day 5, I composed a false patrol rotation, plausible, detailed, entirely fabricated. I left it in the location Harlan's note had specified. A hollow oak at the edge of the southern border, and I watched from a distance as a greystone. Courier retrieved it 3 hours later. I had bought time. What I had not done was tell Caden. Every night I lay beside him and felt the mate bond humming between us, warm, alive, searching, and I thought about telling him. I mapped out the conversation 100 different ways. There is a spy in your pack. Your brother threatened your son. I moved Eli. I've been handling it alone. I'm sorry I didn't come to you first. And every time, I thought about the 20-minute gap between telling him and the moment Tomas would notice the Alpha's energy shift, the change in his bearing. The barely perceptible alteration that came over any Alpha when something threatened his child. Tomas was embedded. He would notice. He would send word. I needed to neutralize Tomas first. Day 6, I went to Brix. Brix was the pack's head enforcer, second only to Caden in physical authority, practical, unsentimental, and possessed of a loyalty so absolute it bordered on the geological. He was also, crucially, the one person in the pack hierarchy who had a completely separate communication channel from the rest. His orders came directly from Caden through a personal cipher. And Tomas had no access to that channel. I couldn't tell him everything. But I could tell him enough. I need Tomas Reed detained, I said quietly. No announcement, no explanation. Hold him in the East Barracks guest room, not the dungeon, make it look like a voluntary check-in. And I need it done in the next 2 hours. Brix stared at me. The healer is giving me detention orders. The healer is asking you to trust her. 2 hours, Brix? I'll explain everything to Caden tonight. I promise. Another long look. Then 2 hours. And you'd better explain everything to him, Lena, because he already knows something's wrong. He's been watching you all week, he had. Of course he had. I had spent 6 days lying to the wolf, whose instincts were calibrated to detect threats to his pack, and those same instincts had been turned, quietly, on me. Act for the collapse. What I hadn't accounted for was the other spy. Tomas wasn't working alone. I found this out in the worst possible way, by arriving home to find Caden standing in our bedroom with a folded piece of paper in his hand, his face completely still, his eyes already gold. The paper was my note to Brix. Not the words I'd spoken. A written follow-up I'd left under Brix's door when I hadn't been able to find him immediately, containing slightly more detail, including the words Harlan and Eastern Border rotation and I can't tell Caden yet. The second spy, whoever they were, had intercepted it. Who gave you this? I asked. That doesn't matter. It matters enormously, Caden. There is a second. You met with a Greystone courier at the southern border on day 5. His voice was measured in the way that meant every word was costing him something. I had you followed. Not because I suspected you, because I was worried about you. You'd been distracted, you weren't sleeping, and I thought, he stopped. I thought maybe you were ill and hiding it from me. The irony was a physical sensation. I can explain. You left something at the Hollow Oak. A Greystone courier retrieved it. He looked at me, and beneath the gold of his eyes there was something devastated. Brix came to me an hour ago. He didn't want to. But he came. Did he tell you? He told me you'd asked him to detain one of my patrol coordinators and that you said you'd explain everything to me tonight. His jaw worked. He also told me about the note. And the border meeting. And the fact that you've been keeping something from me for 6 days, Caden. Listen to me. Eli is safe. Don't, the word was barely a sound. Don't tell me this has something to do with my son, Lena, because if it does and you didn't come to me, I couldn't come to you. Harlan has someone inside this pack who monitors your reactions. If I had told you, Eli would have been gone before you could move. I took a step toward him. I moved him first. On day 1. He's been at the safe house with Dessa and Rorik for 5 days. He's safe. He's been safe the whole time. I was trying to keep him safe. Something moved across his face. Something enormous and complex that I couldn't fully read. Then the second spy walked through our door. I found out, in the next 60 seconds, who it was, Caden's personal aide, Ren, who had been with the pack for 4 years, who had served the Greystone faction as a deep-cover operative since before he ever arrived, and who had apparently decided that with Tomas detained, the operation was blown and his best move was to go directly to the Alpha with a version of events that painted me as the architect. She's been feeding Harlan information for weeks, Ren said. I saw her make the drop myself. Everything happened very fast after that. Caden's warriors were trained to follow his commands, and his command, issued in a voice stripped of all emotion, was, take her to the holding cells. I didn't fight. I didn't explain. Because Ren was still standing in the room, and if I said Ellie's location in front of Ren, it was over. So I let them chain me. And I sat in the dark. ACT-5, the truth he came back for hours later. I heard the footsteps on the stairs, but these ones were different. Not the furious stride of before. These were slower, tired. The door opened. Caden stood in the frame, and he looked like a man who had been fighting himself for 4 hours and wasn't sure who had won. I spoke to Dessa, he said. I said nothing. Eli is fine. He's been asking for you, apparently. He wants to show you a beetle he found. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. He cleared his throat. Ren is in custody. Brix broke him in about 20 minutes. He wasn't built for this work. And once Tomas confirmed the timeline, the whole operation unraveled. He paused. You identified Tomas through the information seeding technique. Mara told me. She said you came to her on day 2 and she knew something was wrong. But you told her to trust you and she did. She's known me a long time. So have I. He crossed the room. He crouched in front of me again. Same position as before, but this time his hands didn't grab. They simply came to rest, carefully, on either side of my face. Why didn't you come to me? Because there was a spy in your house who was watching your reactions. The moment you knew, he would have sent word and Harlan would have moved on Eli before your forces could respond. I had, maybe a 20-minute window of reaction time between your face knowing and the order reaching the safe house. Eli is for Caden. 20 minutes wasn't enough. And you thought you could handle it alone. I thought I could handle it long enough to remove the variable. I met his eyes. I was right. You were right, he said softly. And you let me believe you had betrayed me. I didn't have a choice. You could have told me to trust you. You were following me. Your instincts already told you something was wrong. If I had said trust me and ask no questions, you would have pushed. A long pause. Yes, he admitted. I would have. He looked down at the silver chains on my wrists, and something crossed his face that looked like it physically hurt him. He reached into his pocket and produced the key. The chains fell away. He stayed crouched in front of me, and I stayed sitting against the wall. And we looked at each other in the low light of the dungeon. I chained my mate, he said. I chained you, and you let me, because telling me the truth would have endangered my son. And you decided his safety was worth. He stopped. How long did you know the bond was in play? That I was close to convincing myself you'd betrayed me. From the moment you walked in the first time. I could see it. And you said nothing. And I said nothing. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the gold was gone, or not gone, exactly, but softer. The wolf settling. I'm going to spend a long time being sorry for this. You were protecting your pack, I said. With the information you had, the response was reasonable. It wasn't reasonable. You're my mate. You didn't know that mattered more than the evidence. It always matters more. He stood and held out his hand. Come upstairs. Eli wants to video call you from the safe house. He found a stag beetle and he's named it after me, which I'm told I should find endearing. I took his hand. ACT6, aftermath. We dealt with the aftermath the way the Ironwood Pack dealt with most things, practically, completely, and without ceremony. Ren was handed to the regional council. His deep cover operation had implications beyond a single pack conflict, and the council had authority over cross-pack espionage. Tomas was given a harder choice: stand trial for pack betrayal, or give evidence against Harlan's operation in full. He chose evidence, and what he gave us was enough to take to the regional council and initiate formal proceedings against the Greystone Pack for aggression against a minor, Eli, which carried consequences that would strip Harlan of territorial recognition. It wasn't the dramatic, physical confrontation that Harlan had perhaps expected from his brother. It was paperwork, testimony, and pack law. Caden told me, in the quiet of our bedroom nights after my release, that he'd considered going to Harlan directly and handling it the old way, in the space between territories, just the two of them, the way alpha disputes had been settled for generations. What stopped you? I asked. You, he said simply. I thought about what you'd done. 6 days of carrying something alone, moving pieces quietly, finding a way through that didn't cost anyone their life. And I thought, maybe the quiet way is the better way. Maybe I've been so used to being the wolf in the room that I forget there are other options. You would have won the old way. Probably. He was quiet a moment. But Eli would have grown up knowing his uncle died by his father's hand. That's a different kind of cost, it was. Eli came home on a Thursday, bursting through the front door with the stag beetle in a carefully ventilated jar and an imperious demand that I examine it immediately. I obliged. The beetle was, I confirmed with great seriousness, an excellent specimen. Eli informed me that its name was Caden Jr., which prompted the actual Caden to make a face that he would deny, later, had any resemblance to being offended. We had dinner at the big kitchen table, Mara, Dessa, Brex, Rorik, the boy, and the two of us, and it was loud and ordinary and safe. Act 7, the bond deepens. 3 weeks after the dungeon, Caden asked me something I hadn't expected. We were in the healing wing, late evening, the pack quiet around us. He'd come in for a minor cut, nothing significant, a sparring accident, already half healed, but he'd stayed after I'd dressed it, sitting on the treatment table, watching me clean up. When Harlan's note came, he said the first night. Before you'd moved Eli, before you'd done anything, what were you feeling? I considered the question. Afraid, I said, for Eli. And then, almost immediately, something that was less like fear and more like clarity. Like the problem had a shape and I could see the edges of it. The healer's brain, maybe. Or just I knew what mattered. Eli mattered. Everything else was secondary. Including me. You were never at risk, Caden. My trust was. I set down the roll of bandage and turned to face him. Yes. And I knew that. I chose Ellie's safety over your trust, and I would make that choice again. He looked at me for a long moment. I know, he said. That's why I'm not angry anymore. A pause. I was for a while, after the initial fear passed, after I understood what you'd done and why. There was a period where I was furious that you hadn't trusted me to handle it. I did trust you. I didn't trust the situation. I know that too. He reached out and took my hand. You're better at this than I am. The quiet strategy. The long patience. He turned my hand over in his, looking at the faint marks on my wrists where the silver chains had been, faded now, almost gone, but not quite yet. I keep looking at these. They're healing. I put them there. You put them there because someone built a lie around me and you believed it. That's different from choosing to hurt me, not entirely. I thought about that. No, I said finally. Honestly, not entirely, but the difference is what comes after. And you came back. I would always come back, I know. The mate bond between us was doing something it had been doing more and more since the dungeon, not the bright warmth of the early months, the heady newness of it, but something deeper and less comfortable, a kind of rain-knitting. As if the stress fracture that those 6 days had created was being healed from the inside, slowly, by the simple act of being honest with each other in the aftermath. It hurt a little, the way all genuine healing did. It was worth it. Epilogue. 6 months later, Harlan Voss appeared at our border on a cold morning in February. No warriors with him. No weapons. Just a man in a gray coat, standing at the tree line, which was either an act of trust or an act of calculation, and with Harlan it was never quite possible to know which. Caden went to meet him alone. I watched from the ridge above, not interfering, not approaching, but present in the way that felt right. I couldn't hear what they said. The wind took the words before they reached me. The meeting lasted perhaps 20 minutes. At the end of it, Harlan turned and walked back into the trees, and Caden watched him go before climbing the ridge to where I stood. What did he want? I asked. To negotiate. A pause. Or to give the appearance of wanting to negotiate, which may be different with him. He stood beside me, looking out at the border tree line. He knew about Eli. He admitted it. He said he'd never actually planned to hurt him, that it was meant to be a pressure tactic only. Do you believe him? Caden was quiet for a long moment. I believe he believes that. Whether it's true, he exhaled. He's my brother. We grew up in the same house. I know what he is and I know what he isn't. And what he isn't is someone who could live with himself if he'd actually hurt a child. He paused. That doesn't make what he did acceptable. But it changes the equation slightly. Are you going to negotiate with him? I'm going to let the council proceedings run their course. If there are terms to be discussed after that, we'll discuss them. He glanced at me. You think I should? I think the quiet way has been working, a small sound that was almost a laugh. It has. He turned to look at me fully. The gold in his eyes settled, warm, the wolf at ease. I made you a promise in the dungeon, to spend a long time being sorry. You don't have to. I want to keep it. Not in a self-flagellating way, in the practical way. The way I make decisions. The way I handle information before I act on it. He reached out and touched my face, briefly, the gesture both intimate and deliberate. You gave my son 6 days of safety when I didn't even know he was in danger. The least I can do is try to be worthy of that. I covered his hand with mine. Below us, at the bottom of the ridge, a small figure burst out of the tree line. Eli escaped from whoever was meant to be watching him, red-cheeked and breathless, waving both arms in our direction. He found another one, Caden said, resigned. Another beetle. Last week it was a moth. The week before, a millipede of some kind. He raised his voice toward the hill below. Eli. Stay where I can see you. The small figure waved more aggressively and held up a jar. We walked down the hill together, toward the boy and his beetle and the ordinary afternoon that waited for us. A pack intact, a child safe, a bond weathered and reckoned and holding. Some things, I had learned, were worth protecting in silence. And some silences, once broken, made way for something truer than what had been there before.